Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted to say, is anybody keeping track of these Trump supporters so that when they delete their tweets, we can remember that they were aiders and abettors? I and many other people leapt into that and said, yes, you Stalinist beanie baby, put me on your stupid list. So it's not weakness and it's not concession to acknowledge that that's the case, that there is a huge battle ahead of us, and some might call it an uphill battle, and we may lose. That is not the point. The point is not 100% we are definitely going to win. The point is that any degree of victory and any degree of fight contributes to turning back this decades, generations long Democrat stranglehold on the true and legitimate processes of our constitutional republic. That's a worthwhile fight no matter what.
Welcome, everyone, once again to the Roundtable, the editors and publishers podcast here at the Claremont Institute for our wonderful publication, The American Mind. I'm Ryan Williams, your host, president of the Claremont Institute, publisher of the Claremont Review books and The American Mind, joined by David Barr, director of publications for the Claremont Institute, Matthew Peterson, founding editor of The American Mind and vice president for education, and Spencer Clavin, associate editor of The American Mind and the Claremont Review books. Well, the election brouhaha continues. It's getting lawyered out, as we say. The Trump administration is challenging results in Michigan, in Wisconsin. There's going to be there'll be a recount in Wisconsin. There's a recount that's going to happen in Georgia. Arizona is still a razor thin margin for Biden. And, we continue to stick by what we said in our statement about this, which is count every legal vote. And which apparently now, from the left's perspective, is somehow a conspiracy to defraud the American people of their sovereignty. But it's not. This is going to keep rolling through, and it will be worth watching. That's really all I have to say about that. And we should just get into it. I should flag for everyone, if you haven't checked it out, regular listeners will have seen it, but give a quick listen to about a 20-minute interview Spencer and I did with Matt Brainerd, who's was in 2016 was Trump's data chief for the campaign, and had suggested on Twitter a way of figuring out whether or not there was systemic fraud, especially with mail-in balloting. He's a data scientist first and foremost and knows this stuff in and out. He's a, poll watcher and has been very involved in election integrity for years and does it as a consultant, among other things. So he suggested something and went crazy on Twitter, even though he has barely any followers. And he ended up sending up a GoFundMe, which after it got 250K, of course, GoFundMe shut it down. And then he launched it on a different platform. And he's now hired 7 or 8 people. And they're just going through mail-in data lists, which you can buy, and that's high integrity data lists, and they're reaching out to them and just trying to determine across the 6 most important states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, and Pennsylvania, whether there was any sort of systemic problem. And so anyway, check out that interview Spencer and I did.
A note about that conversation, if I may. For folks that listen to it, and you should, the thing that really struck me in the conversation, when the world goes so insane, it's easy to lose one's own perspective on just what is normal. And one refreshing thing about talking to Matt is that he's just an eminently sane individual with a high degree of competence in his field, doing something that's perfectly rational, which is, so that's helpful in and of itself.
Yeah, he's not flaming out claiming voter fraud. He's just saying we're looking for it. If we find it, we're putting in touch with the campaign and building a file.
Well, one set of questions that I have is, so given that Matt is an eminently sane individual, and given that the sane thing has now become the mad thing, I mean, as I said last week,
the office of the president-elect objects to this.
Yeah, exactly. And soon enough, we'll come crashing down.
Presumptive president-elect.
Yeah.
Well, you guys, I mean, this morning I opened Instagram for my sins because suddenly I have to be on Instagram apparently, and for the president, the sitting president of the United States, Donald Trump, regardless of what happens, right, until January 20th, he is the president. And he tweeted he Instagrammed for Veterans Day a picture of himself saluting and honoring the veterans. And Instagram slaps a warning label. It says the office. It says from the president or something. Instagram,
Wait, what?
Instagram put a warning label on a Donald Trump post saying the president honors the veterans, and the warning label says Joe Biden is projected to win the 2020 presidential election.
Yeah.
That's where we're at. I mean, we've genuinely reached that point. And of course,
it's crazy.
I mean, yeah. I mean, if you look
crazy.
like a slightly charitable, I mean, there's really no charitable reading of this event, but a slightly charitable reading of it is, well, his claim to be the president is folded within their sort of fever dream that he's trying to steal the presidency again in the future. And so they want to remind everybody. But really, I mean, what it reads as is, we hate you. We hated you from the moment you elected Donald Trump. We hate you more now with every passing day. And even your fairly innocuous, entirely innocuous post in your role as president, that will be censored. And this is going on Twitter in the extreme. People are migrating, doing their best to mitigate it, migrating to Parler and so forth. Everybody's impressions are down. All the hammer's coming down, and we haven't even seen the beginning of what it's going to be like. And that's why it was so remarkable to talk to Matt, is that you just recall, oh, right, I'm not actually a kook. I'm not a crackpot, like advocating for some kind of out there theory. I'm a person. just a citizen, leaving aside the fact that we work in media and in conservative media. We're just citizens who want to know how many votes were cast. Like, is that too much to ask, to want to know what the truth is about who won this election? Apparently the answer is yes. And meanwhile, the Party of Unity and the campaign of healing has already begun making lists of bad people that they will be keeping out of public life. Ostensibly, it began with AOC. It didn't begin with AOC, but the most prominent version of it is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted to say, is anybody keeping track of these Trump supporters so that when they delete their tweets, we can remember that they were aiders and abettors? I and many other people leapt into that and said, yes, you Stalinist beanie baby, put me on your stupid list. And I've heard from some lefties and some kind of legacy media folks, yes, we will do an I am Spartacus and stand up and be on these lists. I would like to know whether they will do that when there are real consequences associated, because people, we still are in this place of incredulity. People don't think that they genuinely will put you on these lists, and they'll bar you from entry to financial institutions. They'll bar you from employment and so forth. When I tweeted that at AOC, the most common response was, well, you're not important enough to merit inclusion on these lists, which, first of all, I beg your pardon, I'm very important. But second of all, even if I, had no Twitter followers, that's just not how this works. That's simply not the way these things go. And the supreme historical illiteracy of the people writing these lists, the sort of drastic, just naivete of kind of, this is the new world and it's all going to be fine this time because we're the ones writing the list. We're the one. I mean, when Plutarch, thousands of years ago said that the rivers ran red with blood the last time Sulla tried this, there's only one direction that all of this goes. And when it's not just a Twitter firefight, but when it's an actual exclusion from real centers of power in society, will our friends who maybe didn't vote for Trump, but who think of themselves as centrists, will they sign up for those lists? Will they put themselves on the line and defend us? I wish that I could say with confidence that the integrity of American civic friendship is such that indeed I trust they will. I cannot say that with confidence. And the extremes of where this goes are very intense. Matt was talking earlier, maybe not to put him on the spot, but maybe he can talk more now about the fact that even if you are not a tinfoil hat, extremist about this, you can concede that we've already, a la the frog in the boiling pot of water, reached a stage where by soft degrees, as Tennyson says, by slow and soft degrees, first it was coronavirus, and so now we have to allow a huge degree of mail-in votes, and that we forgot was layered over a status quo in which the Democrat machines always cheat a little bit in the cities. They always steal a couple of percentage points, and compound that with the 300 plus lawsuits that Democrats enacted to make voting this time around just totally abnormal, totally chaotic. We are already at an extreme degree of disorder, even without factoring in, every crackpot person who retweets some video that actually happens to be from 2016. That's not what this is about. This is not about Twitter firefights. This is about a deep and quite gradual, but at this point extensive attempt on the part of Democrats to unmake and delegitimize our democratic process.
Yeah,
really quick before Matt.
Go ahead, Bart. I was just going to say, I don't know that they always steal 1% to 2% in a state, but certainly the political machines have a long tradition of stealing votes.
Yeah, that was perhaps a bit that in itself may have been a bit gestural rhetorically, but yes, I mean there's always been a machine in the cities to do this sort of thing.
Go ahead, David.
I'll be really quick. I apologize. Just so listeners understand clearly what Spencer is alluding to when he discusses lists, there's a Transition Integrity Project, which for a number of hours had a living Excel sheet that was accessible to the public.
The Trump Accountability Project, right?
The Trump account. What did I say? Transition.
You said
there's so many of these things, Ryan.
Right.
But
all the acronyms and
Trump,
names.
Forgive me. Right. The Trump Accountability Project, founded by a senior data guy from the Obama years and senior staffers from Buttigieg. So these are DNC folks, and what they had was an Excel sheet with tabs. Like if you were a law firm associated with defending the president, if you were a judge, if you were an appointee, if you were a rank and file staffer, all the way down to the people that sweep the floors. Like your name was meant to be swept up. And they caught some flack, and so they put a password. They protected it with a password. But it's not as if the marching is. It's not as if the data collection is stopped.
Right.
Like they're going to collect it, and then it'll go live. And the intent very much is to ruin people's lives. And what's great is since I work for the Claremont Institute, there's no secret. There's no secret there.
Nobody's making any discoveries about you.
But think if you're a young person and you had this great opportunity to work in, let's say, like essentially a non-political role, but in the White House, it's the job of a lifetime as a young person. And here these people are, and they want to ruin your future. And it's disgusting.
Yeah, and we should recall, I had forgotten it until someone brought it up, but this is, Obama engaged in this too. He tried to shame and call out Romney's donors when Romney challenged him. And so, even no drama Obama, cool Barack sort of paved the way for this kind of thing. And they should all be denounced for it. And I don't know, we should do some tit for tat if it comes down to that. It might just be a sort of vain exercise in bluster at this point, but you've got to think that they plan to do something with it. And so we should all just be on our guard about it.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, it's interesting because they didn't get the win they wanted. The real story of the election is the success of Trumpism, as no less than Andrew Sullivan points out. And the coming debate, which I don't want to talk about today, but the big debate in the next few months will probably be never Trumpers saying, look, no one wanted Trump, but they did want Republicans. The rest of us pointing out reality, which is in part that, Trump expanded the range of the Republican Party, and this victory, this election was really a victory for what he stands for. That's the coming debate. As far as the cancellation stuff, I mean, they're not going to be able to help themselves, right? The Purge is coming. If they actually take office, they are going to try to purge. They didn't get the mandate they wanted, assuming that they're able to take this by force. But that to me, I mean, at this point, I mean, we're all biased, right? It's like I said on Twitter to AOC. I mean, come take me. Like, come on, like cancel me, please. Go ahead. I'm already out in the open. We're all out in the open. I'm deleting nothing. Like her whole line was, right, people are going to delete their tweets and try to hide their affiliation. None of us are, right? We're all in. And so we're not deleting anything. And besides, as the saying goes, we all are going to be happy in the camps because so many of our friends will be there. And we'll all be there together. We'll be singing songs. And
we're going to make camp tote bags from Claremont. It'll be, swag.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Of internal fellowships.
And I did commit us to, during the gulag, I did commit us on Twitter to being the guys who make the good booze.
Oh, nice.
So we'll make the homemade stuff for you and exchange it for smokes. But I think that the topic that Spencer hit on and really everything that's going on right now hits close to.
I like that. Sorry to interrupt, Matt, but I like that while you mentioned that Spencer is pouring
you can hear
whiskey.
Exactly. We're sliding bullet bourbon across the table at one another. And but I should note also that, and this was also a Twitter meme, Dave Verboy and I will be leading the physical fitness regime at the camps as well.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, as someone said, right, physical excellence will be disallowed, but
it will. But you can pry my barbells out of my cold dead hands, as far as I'm concerned. It's bench press or die.
I mean, look, I'm already 4 kids in the other room in my daughter's room recording this with a glass of Tito's and sparkling.
For all our listeners, we record in the evening, so we're not impinging on our day jobs to do this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's not day drinking that's happening.
Your money's still well spent giving to Claremont.
But it will at the camps. At the camps, let us invite you to day drink because honestly, it'll be the only entertainment. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we're gonna make some income on that. Some people will get it for free. Yeah. Like I said, I mean, Pope Adrian, I'm gonna tithe some booze to him because he'll probably be leading some kind of prayer service. I hope he doesn't cancel me and lets me in the room, but how it goes. I think the subject that's most near and dear to my heart is corruption, and it's just been something that I feel very strongly, as the president would say, about. I think that America is not racist, but you could make the case that if there's any systemic problem, it is a kind of corruption. And I'm a cynical political scientist by trade in the past. I'm a someone who left the academy. Look, I think that corruption is always a part of democratic politics. But as the late Jesse Unruh said in California, if you can't take their money, their women and take their dinners and wake up the next morning and vote against them, you don't belong up here in Sacramento. And what he means by that is, you take donors' money, but at the end of the day, the politician has to make some calls and stay in charge. And the kind of corruption you see right now in America is very deep. And I would say from the beginning of Trump, the difference between the two movies that are playing right now in American society is between the people who are either in denial about or part of and want to cover up, or just don't see this kind of systemic corruption. And you see it playing out right now. The white suburban voters who it looks like they were the ones who were afraid to say they were voting for Trump. The biggest anomaly for the pollsters of any demographic were the white suburbanites who basically lied to the pollsters if they were voting for Trump. And then, of course, a lot of them left Trump because their jobs, their livelihoods were threatened by him. Their overlords, the people they worked for in white-collar professional jobs, were against Trump, and it became politically and just personally, economically, very dangerous for them. But those are the same people who deny this kind of corruption. So you get what we have here. Forget about the particular arguments with this election. Okay, just think about politics as normal. My red pill 10, 15 years ago was doing political consulting work on some of the cities, the 88 cities in Los Angeles County. And it just occurred to me at one point in the midst of all this kind of behind the scenes research and skullduggery that I was looking at a form of regime that could not be called democratic. Right? It's a very odd kind of form of government. These are one-party governments, which is tyrannical, that had to get a vote out, but not everyone cared about voting in these impoverished communities because why bother? There's no competition. And so you had party machines who dominated and got the vote out. And the only real debate was between various interests within the one party, the Democratic Party in Southern California. And then when you look closely about how this was going, you get like 15, 20% of a city voting, right, in a given election. And the money's exchanging hands and the different interests are fighting. And you look at it and say, is this democracy? And that's what's at stake right now. What's at stake right now is the urban political machines have been around for a long time. And a lot of people who know better consider themselves members of the ruling class on the right and think, oh, it's just dirty, Donald Trump Jr. types who are tweeting out this stuff about corruption. There's no fraud in American society. Need to check themselves and realize I always thought the right stood against what the left has done for decades here. And what the left has done for decades is to normalize, as they say, getting the vote out in one-party systems and getting the vote out from mostly impoverished people who would otherwise have no reason to vote. How do they do this? They have a whole network of nonprofits funded by large foundations like Carnegie, the Tides Foundation, all these places, and they fund all these nonprofits which do advocacy for the poor. The way they put it now is they defend minorities' rights and they fight for voting rights. What does that mean? That means they defend an outdated voting system from the 19th century that no one else has. That means they defend the right of people to go and vote the same day because someone knocks on their door from the Democratic Party, has them sign up. Maybe there's some walk around money, maybe there's not. And then that same partisan person takes all the votes in the neighborhood they canvassed the same day and brings it back to central base camp. Yeah. And why are they against voter ID laws? Why are they against all these restrictions with voting to get rid of any kind of corruption? Because they want to harvest ballots, and they have for years. Now, we've allowed that to go on for years in American, urban machine city politics, but now it's affecting the rest of the vote. And I'll stop this rant in a second, but if you look at the conservative think tanks, which, even like Koch money funds, right, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, and in the other states that are affected in this controversy now, if you look to the conservative or right-leaning think tanks, they all have documents out about a long history of struggling with the way in which the left gets their vote out and tries to bend the law so that they can just, harness a bunch of people who they consider to be on their plantation, who they just have to get out to vote the right way on election day, as if they're all serfs, right? And so this is not some new phenomenon. What happened is they changed the rules at a larger scale than usual, and they actually got that vote out at a larger scale than usual because they were trying to whip all their people into a frenzy. And one more thing, and then I'll stop. The people who tell you there's no fraud, if you go and look, like the Brennan Center, for instance, at NYU, puts out a lot of documentation. Now, there's no fraud in America, and we're a bunch of experts. We're going to explain that to you. They've done this for years. So your lib friend on Twitter or on Facebook has probably already posted some kind of report from the Brennan Center telling you with a PhD, imprimatur, that there's no fraud in America. You know who funds the Brennan Center? Guess who? I mean, literally George Soros, the Tides Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and all the usual suspects. And why do they fund it? Because the primary role of Brennan is to get the poor's vote out. So there's a debate going on right now as to what extent this election was preceded illegally. But I think the larger issue is we have to get into what the left is calling democracy and call it out. And if there's a bunch of white suburban people who work fancy jobs and want to live in a state of denial, we need to say, look, what you're calling democracy and allowing to happen in America is basically a plebiscite where the left is just going out and treating voting like filling out a survey.
Yeah, that's the thing we have to bring up, which we've been out of practice in bringing up for a variety of reasons, not least of which is the experience of the Jim Crow South. So objecting to these sorts of limitations on voting has a fraught history in America. But, this is a tradition going all the way back to the founding. democracy was never good in and of itself. I mean, it's all over the Federalist Papers. It's all over any wise person commenting on politics for the last 3,000 years. The democracy or representative government or republicanism, the popular expression of popular will has to be filtered in various ways. The end result has to be at least in the American experience, the end of government is the protection of rights, not the mere exercise of everyone's voice in that democracy. And we just have to get used to on the right with arguments that say, consent of the governed does not mean that every single person in the country has to vote. I'm sorry, it's a harsh truth, but if you are either too poor and dependent to muster the $15 to $30 to find yourself a government ID and vote on election day, you probably shouldn't be voting. That's anathema to the left, which says small d democracy is justice embodied, except when it votes against their preferences, of course. But leaving that aside, these arguments have to be revived by the left, going back a long tradition, going back, a couple thousand years at least. But, even Jefferson, Jefferson's worry about, as you put it, Matt, this sort of urban democracy. Jefferson's worry about big cities was that the many votes of the poor who are dependent in various ways upon various powerful interests in society would just be the plaything of demagogues and political machines. And, that critique is powerful, and you can't refute it by just saying, Tommy J was anti-democratic and bad.
Yeah, it's a remarkable thing. The same people, if you were to press leftists on their views about democracy, this whole notion that, every voice must be heard, and it's so appalling that you would even suggest that people who are dependent to the degree of being unable to muster a government ID shouldn't vote, right? It's appalling that you should. Well, why? Why is that the case? Well, because every person, it doesn't matter, your bank account number doesn't matter. Every person is of infinite worth, which of course is a uniquely Judeo-Christian idea. It's an idea uniquely informed by the Imago Dei and the idea that we're created in the image of God. But leaving that aside even, it's those same people who will tell you that if you're not an expert, you don't get to decide whether you wear a mask or not, right? It's the supreme elitism inherent in the leftist view of just how decisions should be made is at the same time combined with this idea that nevertheless, this infinite person of infinite worth should be shipped out to the polls and his voice should be heard. On the right, the grand irony is that when you begin to make these arguments and when you begin to make them without apology and without having to clear your throat every time you make them, you will be told that you are one of the, terrible new right, alt-right crazies who are abandoning character. You're abandoning the right's commitment to virtue and principle. It's amazing to me people still make these arguments. They're now 6 months, a year at least out of date, at the very, very least. I was posting on Twitter about this today, and you get all of this. Oh, how dare you? Just throw caution to the winds. Aren't we better than that? But of course, our decency and our genuine commitment to civil engagement has been so leveraged against us that even making these very ultimately quite straightforward arguments about how democratic republics work and why they work the way that they do gets us pilloried with the most appalling names. And to not be afraid of that, to simply say, I'm not afraid of you calling me a stupid name that has a big rhetorical flourish in it. To simply say that gets you accused on the right of being part of this reprehensible new movement. As far as I'm concerned, sign me up, baby, because you can call me whatever name you want. Anyway, Matt, it sounds like you want to break in. I'm sorry, I'm talking over you.
No, I just think you're right. Think about the contradiction here. These are the same people who want to say, I believe in science.
Right.
I believe in expertise, not like all these deplorables. The problem with those 71 million people is they're just ignorant. Yes, it's no wonder that college-educated people are not voting for Trump. Oh, but by the way, if all the black people that we round up the same day don't vote for Biden, they're not black. Excuse me? Right? That's who these people are. That's who they are. Who they are is a large largely white, wealthy colossus, a complex of foundations and advocacy groups. And they all have their get out the vote operation to take advantage of people who otherwise probably wouldn't vote. And then they go out as partisans and now are allowed to just harvest ballots. That means a partisan operative who gets paid by partisan people goes out, signs a bunch of people up, gets their votes, and then is entrusted with bringing those votes back. That's what they just normalized. That's what they just legalized with mail-ins and getting rid of the harvesting laws where they could, as well as getting rid of voter ID. And yes, they're very much for democracy, right? They're very much for democracy, except when they're not, which is every time it's not convenient to them, which is most of the time, because they know they have experts that were paid to tell you there's no fraud in America. Everything here is on the up and up. And you're against them, so you're a terrible person because you don't believe in human equality or democracy. I mean, these people are arrogant, smug, and frankly, they're getting away with it. And they're getting away with it because, the right really let this go. It's true that a lot of these conservative think tanks have fought a lot of the changes in voting regulations and laws over the years. But we need to go back and remember this, and we need to buck up all the people on the right now who are afraid of fighting every drop of this. And let me just say this as well. I don't know. I can't say for a fact. I think a lot of fishy things happened. It's very suspect what happened. But I can't say for a fact that at the end of the day, if the all-seeing eye of God looks at every single ballot, it's still a close election, maybe, probably. I don't know. I can't say who wins. I think we need to investigate every part of it. But here's what I'm really thankful for. I'm thankful for, as Josh Hammer said on Twitter tonight, I'm thankful that we're fighting every step of the way. And any win that we have, anytime we show that there is corruption and we reveal to the American people how this actually works in larger urban centers, any of that is a win. And guess what? The left knows it. So like, think about what James O'Keefe, right? He apparently found this guy from the post office, said there was fraud going on, so he was told to do naughty stuff that was illegal. And there's this controversy.
Most prominently to backdate mail-in ballots that were received after the deadline. Yeah. Yeah.
As a postman, he's backdating ballots to make it
or
so
backdate the arrival of them, not necessarily go through one by one. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, look, let's be honest. Okay, so that's one rando thing that happens. Contrary to elite world, a lot of stuff like that happens every election. Yeah. I don't care what PhDs who get paid by Soros say. There's a lot of fraud or shady stuff in gray areas that happens. But so that doesn't prove anything really. But the Washington Post is word enough to go ape crap about it, right? To write a completely, at the very least, a completely misleading article about this incident. And they're playing whack-a-mole with these incidents. And the reason why is they know that any incident that's actually proven of any kind of fraud, even if that only happened once, starts to delegitimize their operation. And so I don't know. I'm just glad that we do have a right now, and especially the younger people, they understand you fight for every vote. You fight until the very end, until you are not going to win. And when you do that, you create more opportunities to win, and you put the other side on the defensive. And if you can do that bravely with courage and with abandon, just not caring about the consequences, you start to change the tide. And even if we go down to a loss, that this fighting is very good because of the consequences, the ripple effects. And I'm happy it's happening.
And it really needs to wake up these state legislators who, maybe a vital sort of minority of them were hip to these things, Matt, in Pennsylvania or Wisconsin or wherever.
Right.
And, this, even if Trump ends up not prevailing, which, the smart money is still on Biden winning. But even if he doesn't, it should really light a fire under these people to do away with the shenanigans. One of the things that Spencer and I learned from that interview with Matt Brainerd was, he's like, look, everyone remembers 2000 in Florida. He said it exposed all sorts of problems. It's only because it was really close. These problems are everywhere. And the reason it usually doesn't come up is because there's a large margin, and it's really very, very, very remotely possible that a vote would be swayed. You know, you're not going to make up 300,000 votes somewhere, even if fraud is sort of really dialed up in inner cities and in the urban centers. So the Republicans need to wake up to this. Otherwise, you know, they're never going to win another national election again. And the Democrats will, of course, try. I've been, you know, as all of us have, we've been on various email threads trading thoughts with colleagues about this. And one of my colleagues at the Claremont Review of Books pointed out, you know, the Democrats are, of course, going to try to cement this widely expanded mail-in voting forever now. COVID or no COVID. I mean, the excuse was COVID, but as we all know from observing the other political side, which tends to play for keeps more, and that speaks to the Josh Hammer tweet, Matt, which is finally we have a right that fights, and that's a good start. But yeah, the other side plays for keeps. They've seen the advantage it gives them, and they're gonna push it to the hilt. You know, the interesting thing would be to look at a state like Oregon, which has had widespread, if not ubiquitous, mail-in voting for years. And maybe it's all above board, mostly because it does not have the prospect of being a swing state and hasn't for a decade. So, you know, in a state, you know, it can be well run in states that don't matter, but in contentious ones, it's milked for all of its advantage by partisans. And my final thing in this little quick segment is just to say, I want to unpolarize this in a way and unracialize it. And I said it when Spencer and I were talking to Matt Brainerd. This would be the case in any large machine controlled by the Republicans too. I mean, if they controlled a city for 3 decades and came to regard their office as kind of a birthright to be passed to their cronies and children, of course, I mean, to put it in sort of federalist terms, you know, your political interest gets married to your self-love, which is all wrapped up in your sense of honor as you interpret it. That, you know, that gets pretty perverted over generations where you have no opposition, and corruption is endemic when you dominate a place forever. So I don't want to make this sound like we're just worried about inner cities, which tend to be disproportionately filled with poor minorities. I think if any Republican machine, even sort of semi-rural, was out harvesting votes of poor whites who never voted, you know, we'd be against that as well. It would not be good for Republican government. It's just not good to go out and marshal votes as votes, untethered from the voter having a sense of investment in the democracy or in the Republican form of government, and some notion of self-worth and self-government and you know, their participation in this experiment. You have a lot of people who are mostly dependent on others as a vote bank, and that's a problem.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's such a. Sorry, Matt, go ahead. I don't mean to interrupt.
Oh, just real quick, Spencer, and you go. Then you go ahead. I just think with the cities, yeah, I mean, I would say the same thing about the old political machines. Right. The truth is they didn't appear to anyone, at least in the early part of the last century, to tip a national election. But back then, the machines were mostly, I hate these weird racial words, like whitish people, right? I mean, they used to be different color. It doesn't matter the color of the person. What the important point is that when you have a lot of impoverished people living in an urban area and there's only one party in charge, then all of a sudden that party starts to play games. And that's just human nature. That's political philosophy 101, which apparently a lot of our Republican friends who are afraid about the other side need to remember right now. They need to remember this larger point.
Yeah, your people used to be a problem, Matt. You know, the Irish Catholics coming out to,
you guys are
buying off your votes with a little bit of whiskey, you know, on election day.
Al Smith got robbed, bro.
But this is so important. I mean, what you're saying, Ryan, is absolutely true. And it, you know, perhaps given that these are features ultimately not of Republicans or Democrats, but of human nature in its extreme venality and its utter fallenness, you know, perhaps it's the case that being the victims of voter fraud makes us puts us in a good position to be fighting back against the effect of that right now. But I think there's something, you know, very profound also about what Matt is saying, that not only will we fight as a political matter for every vote, because we're going to be just as scrappy as the left has been, and we're not going to let them talk us out of that by calling us nasty names. But also, and this is something that when in the emotional intensity of the moment, it's easy to forget. It's easy to feel as if any concession of the reality on the ground is some kind of weakness, especially when places like Fox News, which we're going to have to re-edit that.
News.
News.
No.
That was a Freudian slip if there wasn't. All right, Jake. If you put this in the outtakes, I'll never speak to you again. But
No, that's just going to be in the take. Bleeped.
especially when places like Fox News, which for so long have been many people's only bulwark against the onslaught, the leftist onslaught of the media, right? When those places are turning and revealing themselves to be part of what our absent colleague James Poulos calls the deep blob, this kind of faceless globalist leftist conspiracy, when those places are turning, it's very, very easy to fear that any degree of weakness, any show of moderation is a tell that you're just one step down the slippery slope toward what our friends on the very online right would call cuckery. You're just one step toward a kind of squishiness that ultimately leads only to failure. But that is not the case. We are, in the end, the reason that we want to count every legal vote and the reason that we want to take this to the courts is because we believe that the truth is on our side. It's because we believe that it's true that the American people want Donald Trump to be president. And if that's not the case, part of the truth is that, the forces arrayed against us are very strong and we may lose. We may lose this fight. So it's not weakness and it's not concession to acknowledge that that's the case, that there is a huge battle ahead of us, and some might call it an uphill battle, and we may lose. That is not the point. The point is not 100% we are definitely going to win. The point is that any degree of victory and any degree of fight contributes to turning back this decades, generations long Democrat stranglehold on the true and legitimate processes of our constitutional republic. That's a worthwhile fight no matter what. Look, do I still think we'll win? Do I still think that there's fraud? Yes, of course. But pointing that out is not a concession to point out that the world is broken and the good guys don't always win is not a concession. It's part of the calculus here.
Yeah. I'll point out just in the relentless propaganda column. So there's I forget his name, but there's I think a Georgia legislator, maybe a state legislator, who said time to secede, which he spelled succeed. So the Washington Post was having fun mocking him. But in that piece, I think it came up that he'd said that the American Republic is not a democracy; it's a republic, and the parenthetical or in between the commas snarky comment from Washington Post was the same thing that the John Birchers used to say.
Oh my gosh, this was remarkable. But that's important. I mean,
sure. So it's it's of a piece with the rhetorical strategy against the right going back 60 years or 70 years, I should say, which is in retrospect, whatever the somewhat kooky views of the John Birch Society and its president were, in retrospect, it looks like Buckley was probably wrong to exile the John Birch Society. Look, you can call out, to the extent that they were anti-Semitic, you call them out. To the extent that they say Ike was a communist, call them out. But sort of reading them out of the movement, I love that, was probably a mistake in the sense that the left is much better than the right on marshaling and supporting its various coalitional folks and energizing them. That does not mean that you never correct people when they're wrong. It doesn't mean that you assemble anyone in your coalition because it helps you win regardless of their views. But I think that the sort of purge mentality on the right that was started in a way and that has its founding myth in a way in the Buckley purging of the Birchers should be rethought. And I think a lot on the right are rethinking it.
You're talking about a proud Republican from the state of Mississippi.
Oh, Mississippi.
Named Price Wallace.
Thank you, Matt.
A state representative.
Yeah.
And
Georgians who listen to this podcast, please don't hate me for imputing a Mississippian to you.
Of course, they're talking about this guy because he's from Mississippi, so of course he's a racist deplorable.
Yeah,
we have no evidence that he's anti-Semitic or anything else at all. But the article says it appeared to be an overt throwback to the Confederacy. Right now, if there was a Republican media worth a we would have articles about how John Podesta, appeared to throw himself back to the Confederacy when he threatened to secede in the war games the Democrats played. While he was playing Biden, he was playing the president in the war games they held to try to figure out how to game the election. And in those war games, Podesta threatened to secede with Democrat states. And of course, Gavin Newsom was roundly praised for his radical federalism against the president, his strong attachment to states' rights under the Trump administration, and his description of California as a nation state, which there were all kinds of Vox explainers about. Oh no, it's totally cool. He calls California a nation state. It's all good. And so this poor guy from Mississippi has a tweet on Twitter that he deletes where he says, he's pissed off about the election, says Mississippi should secede. And it's like, how many people from the left say all the time they're gonna move, they should form a new country, and Podesta is saying he should secede. That's no problem. That's totally cool. This guy actually apologized, called it inappropriate, doesn't represent my desire of my constituents and myself to actually secede from the union, but they're still going to screw him over. And he says, look, first of all, I truly love the USA and the state of Mississippi. I would never support any idea of seceding from the union. I just, I humbly ask for forgiveness for my poor lack of judgment. Imagine that. Here's a guy from the state of Mississippi who says, I humbly ask forgiveness for my poor lack of judgment. I would love to see something remotely similar from our friends on the left who have been in power for years and do not apologize for sending us into war, for lying about the president with Russian collusion and everything else they've done. And then the part that Ryan mentioned earlier really is hilarious, because what he says is the majority does not rule. The law derived from a constitution has the final say. Robert Foster wrote, who's a former Mississippi state representative, and he was a 2019 gubernatorial candidate. And what the Washington Post says is he claimed the United States is a constitutional republic and not a democracy. Let's just listen to this again, okay? They're citing a guy in Mississippi who's a politico, and what this guy said was the majority does not rule. The law derived from a constitution has the final say. The Constitution is the ultimate ruling authority, in other words. And what the Washington Post did is describe his claim as the United States is a constitutional republic and not a democracy. And then they go on to his claim the U.S. is not a democracy, a talking point pushed by the ultra-conservative John Birch Society. Excuse me. A claim that's pushed by every leftist who's ever lived. This isn't a true democracy. A claim that's pushed by anyone who's upset with our system, that this is not a true democracy. But also, if you want to get politically philosophic about it, a claim that simply is true. It's not a pure democracy, right? That's their fact check. Yeah. That he claimed the United States is a constitutional republic and not a democracy. That's crazy. This isn't a constitutional republic. This is the place in which we pay to get poor people to go out and vote the right way come election day.
Yeah, it's remarkable. So the one thing, the thread that I lost was just this old anecdote from my experience running the Claremont Institute, and then before that being very involved with a lot of our events in Orange County and Los Angeles. And you get, and it's on the question of the Birchers. We have a lot of old folks who've been supporting us for 30 years and even 40 years who come out to, evening events in like Orange County. And I just remember this one couple. They're just small government folks. They don't like the left. They don't like the anti-constitutionalism of the left. They've been opposing it for years. And they're kind of still proud Birchers. That doesn't mean that they embraced like some of the crackpot stuff from the president of the John Birch Society in many of his, newsletter fulminations. They were just part of this group that was anti-giant government, anti-communist. And, these political associations are messier, and a lot of people take the general bent of the political organization seriously, and they don't take all of the individual details of members of that organization literally.
You are about to watch this happen because the left, the left is 4 years behind on this. The right has been having its internal convulsions ever since Trump was nominated for the presidency, and the left has only been able to just say we hate Trump, and they've never turned inward and asked, well, are we the Squad or are we Nancy Pelosi? And they're about to have these fights. And let me tell you, they will not kick out Ilhan Omar, a sitting congresswoman who is a visible anti-Semite, who has said appalling things about Jews. They will not kick out AOC, who is an open communist, right? A word that used to be an insult among, for example, the Kennedys, right? I mean, they will never, ever kick those people out. They know how to do this sort of thing. And they've also figured out how to make us kick out useful members of our coalition who have fringe views that we should openly reject, while we nevertheless count them within our tent. They have figured out that if they just call them the nastiest names they can possibly think of, they will make us afraid of them, and that will go on for exactly as long as we allow it. Exactly as long as it works, that's how long it's going to work. But I'm sick of it, and I think a lot of people on the right are sick of it, and we should stop being cowed by this because it's a ploy. It's a complete psyop, and you're about to watch how much of a psyop it is when the left, in their reckoning, embraces, even if it doesn't end up going the direction of the Squad, is going to embrace them. It's going to let them be part of it because that's votes, that's voices, that's people that they can use, and we should do the same.
Just really quick, a lot of this stuff, the right, a lot of this blame falls upon the shoulders of some of our colleagues and erstwhile friends, because the denunciation of fellow conservatives by other conservatives. Right now, this is on full shameful display by, say, the people that make up the Lincoln Project. It's coming from internal. So it's one thing if we stood round and linked arm in arm, but some of our biggest and most effective detractors come from within the movement.
Yeah, and these clowns are like, oh, well, you haven't, said the specific magic words that I'm going to make you say over and over again to renounce racism, even though, for instance, in Claremont's case, for 40 years, we've stood for the Declaration of Independence, which asserts as a self-evident truth that all men are created equal in a fundamental way, and that relates to the form of the polity. And so they're completely full of crap, and because what we have to acknowledge, and this is such a good point that you guys bring up, is that they don't care. They don't give a damn at all about making their own people renounce racism. They're not sitting there like looking at what Black Lives Matter's founders say about how whiteness is evil intrinsically, and therefore America is evil intrinsically because whiteness is evil. They're not sitting there looking at Kendi and saying, "My gosh, you sound like a racist." They don't care at all. They've never curbed the anti-Semitism on the left, which is rampant on campuses right throughout this country, which is in Omar's statements, but many, many such cases. They could give a damn about anti-Semitism or racism if it suits them. And meanwhile, they look at the right and they say, you better heal, you're all terrible racists. And this is a game that is not worth playing anymore. It needs to stop.
Right. And any person that is an adherent, who is openly and actively in his heart an adherent of the constitutional regime of America, which, as we've argued extensively, is fundamentally anti-racist, never mind disavowing other people, disavowing, folks that are part of your coalition, any person who feels the need to make some kind of concession to these accusations or to apologize for his open affirmation of the American regime, that person needs to take a look in the mirror and man up, because good grief. I mean, look, I am so done with this. I'm so done being called a homophobe of all things. I'm so done being called a racist. Oh, none of those things makes a dent
Wait a
anymore.
minute, Spencer, you need
Yes.
to tell people, like, you've been called a homophobe.
Repeat. Oh my gosh, every damn day, Matt. It's like it's routine.
You're the most anti-gay gay on the internet.
And,
right?
and to be fair, I do kind of think that gays are annoying, but like that's but that's a separate question. I mean, oh yeah, no, but this actually, not to be identitarian about it, but this puts me in a uniquely good place to see what nonsense it is, right? Because like when people say you're a homophobe, then I go home to my boyfriend and just think, well, this is funny, but like you can see what emptiness it is. And you only need to extrapolate that to everything else. It just so happens that I'm gay, and it's ridiculous that they're calling me that. But none of you is a racist, Like it's equally ridiculous. It's just as ridiculous for them to call you a racist as it is for them to call me a homophobe. And it's only the fact that that you guys are white that makes it less immediately apparent that they're so empty. They're so full of nothing. And the minute you say anything to concede to them, you're playing their game, and we just got to stop doing it.
Yeah, well, Barr's only half white.
Well, that's right. Actually, you guys, Bar is not in fact fully white. But more to the point, right? Exactly. It's like everybody's
Gracias, amigos.
everybody's everything, and none of this stuff matters. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and the Claremont Institute, like the anti-Semitism stuff is hilarious. Claremont
Oh, that's
Institute is
hilarious.
basically founded by a Jew, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
we are the Jewish
great,
deep state.
yeah. Whose great teacher we all revere, also a Jew.
Also Jewish.
yes,
And,
yes,
and,
we read-
and now chaired by a Jew, Tom Klingenstein.
Yeah. And I'm Jewish. I mean, come on, like heritage-wise,
Oh yeah, so
We're lousy with Jews and Catholics over here, as I like to joke.
Saturated with it.
Despite
Yeah,
the WASP caricature that I think many of our critics would embrace.
Yeah.
Well, we are about out of time, so we should just wrap up. And this is going to be a wild few weeks, I think. And I should plug. We will not tell you where it is, but we're having our annual alumni retreat in a couple days, and it's going to be wonderful. We have about 100 alumni from our various fellowships coming out to talk about the future of the right, the current state of the right, and the ongoing coup, which, whatever the result of this election, I think has been manifestly proved as a big problem, as we kind of delved into a bit today. What we're also going to do at that retreat is announce our new Washington, D.C. Center, which I've kind of half plugged on this before, but the really formal public launch of the Center for the American Way of Life in Washington, D.C., run by a Claremont alum himself, Arthur Millick, who was a longtime employee at the Heritage Foundation and helped David Azarad run the Center for Principles and Politics at Heritage, which is kind of a little Claremont shop in a way, doing founding principles and the threats to them and the problems with modern progressivism. That was their work there. We're happy to welcome Arthur, which we brought on midsummer, and he's been planning and working away. We'll talk a bit more next week. I think we're going to have Arthur on as a special guest to talk about what the center is going to be up to, the people who are going to be working with it, and we're very excited about all of that. We have a commitment, I should mention, from one of our most generous funders to help launch that center, but it's not enough. We're looking for matching or fellow contributors. So if you're interested in that work, the work of the center will be the future of the American right, and it's necessary tethering to the principles that made America great, but their reapplication and given changing times, whether it be with the problems of big tech or identity politics or anything else. So I look forward to letting you all know more about that, and look forward to talking to anyone who's interested in funding it. So with that, thanks for listening to the Roundtable. If you want to learn more, visit our websites at americanmind.org, claremont.org, and claremontreviewbooks.com. Don't forget to rate, review, share, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave a 5-star review. I'll channel Spencer and say,
Please
keep your bad opinions to yourself.
That's
if you
right.
have anything other than a 5-star review, it helps us very much. We appreciate it. And thanks to the production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon and Annalisa Lee. Annalisa actually is in the field helping prep for our alumni retreat, which starts Friday night. So we just have Jake here in the studio. But anyway, with all that, thanks everybody. Talk to you next week.